देशु जागृति कामं 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 कामपुरुषो पुरुषो निर्मिमाणः निर्मिमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तदेव शुक्रब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शितः सर्वे तदूनात्यपि कश्चन एतद्वैता 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 एतद्वैता.
Thank you, Chintan. Now I request CA Nihar Darod to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Rahul. It gives me immense pleasure to formally introduce my friend Amit for today's session. Amit is a partner of GBC and Associates LLP Chartered Accountants. He holds a Bachelor of Commerce degree and is a fellow member of the ICAI. Amit is also an All India rank holder at the Intermediate Chartered Accountancy examination. Amit has more than 6 years of experience and his area of specialization includes merger and acquisition, transaction and business structuring, valuations, ESOPs, CFO outsourcing, and NBFC practice. Amit's clients span across sectors and his experience includes complex transactions involving listed as well as unlisted clients. Amit was also a professor at JK Shah Classes, Mumbai. Amit has contributed to several articles to professional journals of Chamber of Tax Consultants as well as CVOCA Chartered Accountant and Cost Accountants Association. With this formal introduction, I welcome Amit for today's enlightening session and request you all to welcome him with a virtual applause. Welcome, Amit.
Thank you so much, Nihar, for this kind introduction.
Yeah, Amit, just two minutes.
Yeah.
We have with us ex-chairman of WIRC and study circle head at Preeti Savla. So I request her to just share his thoughts for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Rahul Bhai, for giving me this opportunity. At present, I am heading the Study Circle Coordination Committee at WRC. Friends, let me tell all of you that the Dadar East Study Circle, the convener, deputy convener are really doing wonderful work by organizing these sessions and taking the session and sharing the knowledge on virtual mode also. And really I appreciate the efforts of Rahul, Jigar and Chintan especially for organizing these programs. Friends, lot of things have recently changed. We have ICAI has issued new networking guidelines, so where it is not possible right now for various firms to go with the partnerships and all. So before partnership they can have alliance with the other firms or network with other firms. And again, the technology has also changed a lot. So accordingly, we have also thought to have one panel discussion on practice development strategies, which will cover specialization, networking and technology. So we will plan soon this session at our study circle level also. So I wish and I hope everyone is safe and healthy in this pandemic. Wish you all the best, and any support required for study circle or in person at ICAI level, please feel free to connect me directly or through conveners. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Preeti Ben. Now I request Amit Bhai to continue the session. Thank you.
Just a minute, I am sharing my screen.
Yeah, Amit, visible.
Yeah. So good evening, everyone. Hope you all doing well and taking proper care. At the outset, I would like to thank Dadar is CPA Study Circle for giving me this opportunity and to take this very interesting topic. So this topic, issues in taxation of partnership from under Finance Act 2021. There are only 3 amendments in the section, but there are plethora of issues coming out of this amendment. I think government will need to come out with the clarification on guidance on various aspects under this amendment. In the course of this 2-hour session, what I have tried to cover is the detailed analysis of the provisions. What are the issues, apparent issues which are arising from these amendment? What can be the possible options or view possible? And at the end, we can have a Q&A session to discuss the queries, if any. To start with, this is a very traditional structure of a partnership firm. And for the today's discussion, whenever we are talking about partnership firm, it will include the limited liability partnership, EOP, BOI, all 3 will be included in this discussion. So in a traditional partnership firm, there are partners who contributes capital either in terms of money, or they introduce capital in form of some other capital asset. They also contribute efforts. So with all these assets, money and efforts, ultimately partnership firm carries on the business. It holds the asset, also it acquires the assets in the course of business. Now, against this contribution, what partners get? Partners get interest in the firm. So this is a very interesting concept which has been discussed in various judgments by the court, that what do you mean by interest of partner in the firm, whether it is only the capital balance which is standing in his capital account. So the answer to this, or the definition of this in terms of various judgment, is like this: partner's interest in the firm is nothing but right to obtain 2 things. When the partnership firm is surviving, then his right to get share of profit during the subsistence of the partnership, and on the dissolution of the firm or retirement, to get value of his share in the net partnership assets which remain after satisfying all the debts and liabilities of the partnership firm. So this is basically the partner's interest in the firm. The taxation of partnership firm historically has taken various changes, amendments, etc. Before the Finance Act 2021, the legal structure or the taxing provision, important ones, were like this. We all know about section 10(2)(a), which says that whatever is the share of profit which a partner gets is exempt, because partnership firm has already discharged tax on it. So whatever a partner gets from the profit of the firm is exempt in his hands. Then coming to the capital gain provisions, there is this section 45(3), which says that if as a partner I contribute a particular capital asset as a capital contribution, then there is a transfer of capital asset, and this is liable to tax in my hands, being a partner of the firm. And it also defines the computation mechanism. Suppose the asset, say, has a cost 100 rupees, I transfer it to a partnership firm, irrespective of fair market value. If the firm records this capital asset, say, at rupees 150, then the difference between value recorded by the firm in its books of accounts minus my original cost of acquisition will be a capital gain chargeable to tax in the hands of partner. So this was the earlier provision. Then there was this section 45(4), where we'll see there are a lot of amendments in the current Finance Act. This is earlier 45(4), which is to provide that if a firm is distributing any capital asset by way of distribution on 2 events, one is dissolution or otherwise, then there is a taxing event happening. The tax will be on partnership firm. What will be the full value of consideration? Then it is fair market value of the capital asset transferred. So considering the same scenario, where I had contributed asset to a firm, suppose partnership firm transfers any capital asset to a partner, then whatever is the fair market value of that capital asset will be a full value of consideration, and original cost or the cost as per section 48 will be allowed as a deduction. So this was taxing provision when anything was going out from a partnership firm. Interesting to note that it was applicable only on case of when there is a distribution of a capital asset. So what was not covered was stock in trade or distribution of cash, and it was applicable on dissolution or otherwise. So dissolution is pretty clear, but what is not clear is what do you mean by otherwise. So there are various judgment where some judgment says that if there is no dissolution, only change in profit share, then it does not amount to, is not covered under 45(4). There are different case laws whether retirement gets covered under this section or no. So this was scenario existing before the Finance Act 2021. With the amendment, everything else has remained same. So basically section 10(2)(a) has remained same, 45(3) has remained same, there is no change. What has changed is 45(4). Now there is no erstwhile 45(4). Instead we have three different sections, section 9b, section 45, new 45(4), and there is amendment in section 48. Interesting to get the background that why these changes were introduced. What was the need to change the scope of existing section 45(4) and introduce these new sections? So what was the objective based on memorandum? It says that 45(4) covers the transfer of a capital asset on dissolution or otherwise. What is not covered? What if the capital asset is not distributed? Rather, what a partnership firm does, it revalues the capital asset. And to a retiring partner, instead of giving capital asset, suppose they pay cash, suppose they pay money, then the 45(4) was not applicable. And with this logic, to tax even the distribution on account of such kind of revaluation in excess of a capital contribution, these amendments were made. The wordings were that it is proposed to substitute the existing subsection 45(4) with a new subsection 45(4) and to insert a new subsection of 45(4)(a). That was the wordings of Memorandum of Finance Bill 2021. Ultimately, when the Finance Bill traveled and reached till the stage of Finance Act, there was no section 45(4)(a) ultimately. Now we have 45(4) and section 9b. Interesting to note that the new section 9b is similar to earlier section 45(4), and the current 45(4) which is there in the Finance Act 2021 is somewhere a new provision which was given as a 45(4)(a) under the bill. So this was the brief intention behind this amendment. So we'll look at first 45(4), then we'll have a look at a 9b, and then 48(3) with some illustrations. Some key concepts which are used under section 45(4) and 9b is specified entity, which means a partnership firm. So it will include LLP, other association of person, and BOI. What do you mean by specified person? Then it means a partner. So these short forms will use firm, specified entity, partner, and SP. These short forms we'll keep on using in the course of our discussion. Very interesting definition which has been introduced in the Finance Act 21 is what do you mean by reconstitution? So as we discussed earlier that there was ambiguity that whether change in PSR or only retirement will trigger erstwhile section 45(4). Now this ambiguity has been resolved. Reconstitution means if one or more partners or member ceases to be a partner. So that means it covers the retirement. If one or more new partners or members are admitted, so it covers admission of a new partner. What if all partners and members continue as it is with a change in their respective share or in share of some of them? So there is a third category also. Hello. So there is this third category covered where there is no admission, no retirement, but the change of share is there between the partners. So that is also covered under the scope of reconstitution. Now we'll do the detailed analysis of section 45.4. Very interesting to note the initial opening wordings of the section, notwithstanding anything contained in section 45.1. So as we all know that 45.1 is the charging section for any capital gains, which says that for capital gains, there are two things which are very essential. First, there has to be a capital asset. And second, there has to be a transfer of capital asset. With the opening wordings, which says that notwithstanding anything under 45.1, there may be a chance that there may be no transfer, there may be no capital asset, but still there will be a capital gain. Going further, this section applies where a partner receives during the previous year any money or capital asset or both from a firm. So the chargeability will come when partner receives either money or capital asset. Interesting to note that for the purpose of 45.4, what if I receive stock in trade? What if I receive personal effects or rural agriculture land, which as per the definition of capital asset are not covered, not considered as a capital asset? Whether 45.4 will apply, the answer is no. It will apply only if you receive money, capital asset or both. When I should receive this asset or money? So it has to be received in connection with reconstitution of such firm. Very important that there has to be a reconstitution, and whatever a partner is receiving has to be in connection with that. So what if a partner in a normal course of business makes a drawing of cash or he withdraws some asset? Then whether this 45.4 will apply, answer is no. There has to be only reconstitution. Very important to note that this 45.4 applies only if there is a reconstitution. It does not apply when there is a dissolution. Very important aspect. If there is a receipt which is in a connection with reconstitution, then any profits and gains arising from such receipt by partner. This is a sea change in terms of section 45.1, where we have seen that the capital gains are triggered when there is a transfer of a capital asset and there are gains arising from such transfer. Whereas under 45.4, gains arises by a receipt by a partner. Gains arises from a receipt by a partner. So this is very interesting to note. If everything is satisfied, then whatever are the gain from such receipt will be chargeable to tax as an income of the firm under the head capital gain. Again, very interesting drafting that gains are on receipt. Who is receiving? Partner is receiving. So ideally, who is getting these gains? So the partner is getting the gains. But the section charges partnership firm and not the partner. So it taxes gain of a partner which is payable by the firm. If everything is satisfied, this shall be income of the firm. And in which year this will be taxable? It will be taxable in the year in which partner receives that capital asset or money. Again, everywhere under section 45, the normal course of action, we check whether it is chargeable to tax under section 45.1. Are there any exemption under section 47? If there are no exemption, then we jump to section 48, which provides the computation mechanism, which is there is a full value of consideration. From that we deduct cost of acquisition, then cost of transfer, and net results is a capital gain. In section 45.4, what the section says that notwithstanding anything contained contrary in the act. So we don't have to go to section 48. We have to ignore section 48. And how to define, how to determine the capital gain under section 45.4? Then there is this specific formula in the subsection itself. The gains are A is equal to B plus C minus D. So there is no cost of acquisition, indexation, etc. There is this simple formula. What do you mean by A? A is income chargeable under section 45.4. What do you mean by B? Is value of money received by a partner from a firm in the event of reconstitution. What do you mean by C? Is fair market value of the capital asset which is received by the partner from the firm on reconstitution. We add these both because partner is receiving money also, he is receiving capital also. So we add B plus C, but what is to be taxed is receipt over and above my capital balance. So we have to deduct from this balance in my capital account, represented in any manner. So even if it is fixed capital or current capital, everything which is forming part of my capital account, I have to deduct it. Interestingly, what if the answer of A is negative, meaning thereby I receive cash of say 100 on reconstitution, say on retirement I receive cash of rupees 100, but my capital balance was say 200. So can I say a partnership firm will have loss in this scenario? So answer is no. The section 45(4) provides that if the answer of all this calculation, the ultimate answer of A is negative, then its value shall be deemed to be 0. So if the answer comes negative, you have to ignore. There is no capital gains and there cannot be any capital loss under section 45(4). Again, very interesting to note, often in the past we have seen that whenever there is a reconstitution, when a new partner is coming or there is a retirement, there is a traditional accounting concept of recording goodwill, where we record goodwill and credit to partners in their partner PSR ratio, and we debit it in the ratio of their sacrifice. So the partner who is retiring or the one who is sacrificing his PSR gets a net credit of its goodwill. Now, the interesting to note that also there are some cases we do the revaluation. So can we consider the amounts which are standing to my capital account, which has arose on revaluation or this self-generated goodwill, etc.? The answer is no. What I have to consider is my pure capital, which is arising from a contribution of money or capital asset, or by way of credit of profit. What I cannot consider is any revaluation, self-generated goodwill, or self-generated assets. They have given definition of what do you mean by self-generated goodwill or asset. It means goodwill or asset which you have acquired without spending anything, or which is generated during the course of business. So what if there is a paid goodwill or there is a paid IPR? Then that can be included. Now we'll come to issues arising from section 45(4). Before going to issue, just have a small recap of 45(4). We says that it arises when a partner receives something. What is that something? Then it is any money, capital asset, or both from firm. When I should receive in connection with the reconstitution. Then any income which arises from such a receipt will be taxable, but taxable in whose hands? It will be taxable in the hands of partnership firm, though from the wording it looks like it is income of the partner. And the taxation mechanism is as per 45(4), not as per the 48. So coming to interesting issues that we have seen, how to compute capital gain, etc. Now the next question is, I arrive at an answer, final, what is my gains? Now, what nomenclature I should give it to such gain? Should I call it as a long-term capital gain or short-term capital gain? Very interesting to note the wordings of section 2, subsection 42B, which says that, what do you mean by short-term capital gain? Short-term capital gain means a capital gain arising from a transfer of a short-term capital asset. Very important to note, it is a capital gain which arises from a transfer. Similar definition is there for a long-term capital gain also. Now, we have seen in the previous slide that for section 45(4), notwithstanding anything in 45(1), this capital gain does not require any transfer of capital asset. It arises on receipt. So there is no transfer, there is a receipt. So can we say that my capital gains will fall under this definition, that short-term capital gain means capital gain arising on a transfer of a short-term capital asset? Answer seems like no, it cannot be a short-term capital gain because it is not arising on any transfer. Similarly, it cannot be a long-term capital gain also. Now the question is, then what is the nature? The possible answer is that it is neither long-term capital gain nor short-term capital gain. The next corollary to this, that whether indexation benefit will be available, which is there under section 48 second proviso. Again, the answer seems to be no, because the indexation benefit comes from section 48, the normal computation mechanism. But 45.4 has its own computation mechanism and it is notwithstanding section 48. So answer is no, indexation benefit will not be available for section 45.4. Again, connected to LTCG or STCG, what will be the tax rate if a partnership firm has an income under section 45.4? So if it is so for capital gains, there are two tax rates. One which is given under section 112, which provides for a concessional tax rate of 20%. Whether that tax rate is applicable, again the answer seems no, because this is not income arising on transfer of a long-term capital asset. It is income which arises on a receipt. So again, concessional benefit, concessional tax rate of 112 looks difficult in 45.4. Similarly, there are benefits of section 54 EC and F which are available on transfer, but as we have discussed, there is a no transfer. 54 EC is not available. 54 F is available to individual and HUF if they have a capital gain. But interestingly, under 45.4, the gain is of a partnership firm, and partnership firm cannot get deduction benefit of section 54F. Hence, even 54F deduction or the benefit is not available when we are calculating gains under section 45.4. Now, we have computed the capital gains under section 45.4. We have seen that whatever the answer will be, it will either be a 0 or more than 0. It can never be a negative. So there cannot be a loss scenario under section 45.4. But what if I have gain under section 45.4 and I have losses under other heads? So can I do set off of these losses with the capital gain of section 45.4? We'll analyze first intra-head adjustment, then inter-head adjustment, and then the set off and carry forward provisions. First, we'll look at the provisions of section 70 subsection 2, which provides for intra-head set off of short-term capital loss. The wordings are like this: where the result of computation made for any assessment year under section 48 to section 55 in respect of any short-term capital asset is a loss, means there is a short-term capital loss, then it can be set off against the income, if any, arrived under a similar computation made for assessment year in respect of any other capital asset. So normally the logic is, if I have a short-term capital loss, then I can set off this against any other short-term capital gain or any long-term capital gain. But if we look at the definition, what has to be present is the similar computation. So if I am having loss, short-term capital loss, I can set off against short-term capital gain if it is computed under similar fashion. So what is the similar mechanism? The mechanism which is provided under section 48, where there is a full value of consideration, deduct the cost of acquisition, cost of transfer. If this is the mechanism followed for both the things, basically the loss and the gain, then I can do the set off. But under section 45.4, the computation mechanism is very different. It is not at all similar to 48. It is B plus C minus D. Then can I satisfy the condition of similar computation to do the set off? The answer looks negative, that I can't do because it is calculated under the different mechanism. So possible view, short-term capital loss cannot be set off against the 45.4 income. What about the long-term capital loss? then again, similar problem is there. This section also requires similar competition as a criteria for doing the set off. As we have seen 45.4 different competition mechanism. So again, long-term capital loss cannot be set off against the 45.4 income. What if, so intra-head is not possible. Is there any possibility of doing inter-head set off? So basically, can I set off business loss against this income? Then the section which is 71.2 is like this, where in respect of any assessment year, the net result of computation under any head of income other than capital gains is a loss. Then, and the assessee has income assessable under the head capital gains, then such loss may be set off against this income under any head of the income, including the head capital gain, whether relating to short-term capital asset or any other capital asset. So again, to revisit this section 71.2, this says that any other loss, say business loss, can be set off against the capital gain income, whether that capital gain income is relating to a short-term capital asset or any other capital asset. Now there is no requirement of similar computation, but what is creating problem is that this words in the bracket, whether relating capital gains, whether relating to a short-term capital asset or any other capital asset. Now we have seen in the earlier slides that for section 45.4, especially when a partner on the reconstitution is receiving money, and then there is this computation mechanism and we arrive at a capital gain for a partnership firm. This capital gain is relating to which capital asset? Now there is no answer to it. So if there is no capital asset relating to such gains, how to classify this as a short-term capital asset or any other capital asset? So because of this difficulty, a possible conservative view can be even the interhead adjustments are not possible against this capital gain, because this is neither related to any short-term capital asset or any other capital asset. Now going forward, can I do set off of earlier year short-term or long-term capital loss? Again, the similar problem remains that I can do a set off of earlier year short-term capital loss if in respect of capital gain in respect of any other capital asset. So for doing this set off, what I need is capital gain in respect of a capital asset. As we have discussed earlier, there is a question mark on what is the capital asset for section 45.4, and hence conservative possible view is that even set off of earlier years capital loss is not possible. Now, interestingly, we have seen applicability of section 45.4 that it applies if there is reconstitution. Whether death of a partner can be considered as an event of reconstitution. If we go by the literal meaning, what do you mean by reconstitution? It means if one or more partners ceases to be a partner. So on a literal reading, what view looks like that yes, death of a partner can tantamount to reconstitution because the deceased partner ceases to be a partner of the firm. So it is covered under reconstitution. However, the question will arise when we are applying section 45.4, because in section 45.4 we have seen that what is required, there has to be a receipt of a capital asset or a money by whom? It has to be received by a specified person, meaning thereby partner. So for 45.4 to get triggered, there has to be receipt by a partner. In case of death of partner, who is going to receive the money or a capital asset? It is not going to be a deceased partner, but it is going to be by his legal heirs. So can we say that section 45.4 applies? Again, a big question mark. If we try to get guidance from some other sections, so there is this section 159 of Income Tax Act, which provides for taxation in case of a deceased person in the hands of legal representative. Whether any guidance can be taken from section 59, answer is no, because section 59 applies where deceased person would have been liable to pay tax if he had not died. So in case of section 45.4, who is liable to pay tax is not the partner, is the partnership firm. So again, no guidance available under section 159. There is interesting provision under Partnership Act, section 28, subsection 2, which says that the legal representative will not be liable for any acts done by the firm after the death of the deceased partner. So it clearly indicates that legal representative cannot be placed on the same footing as a partner. So the possible view can be, yes, there is a reconstitution, but there is no receipt by the partner, and hence one can argue that 45.4 may not apply in case of a death of a partner. Now, when we were reading the bare section, we have read that where a specified person, basically partner, receives any money or a capital asset, we have read this line again and again, that there has to be receipt of a capital asset. Now, very basic question, that the asset has to be a capital asset, but for whom? Whether it has to be a capital asset for the partnership firm who is giving away such asset, or it has to be a capital asset for the recipient, basically the partner. Again, no clear answer, but if we go to the section 48 subclause 3, which is amendment under this act, then the possible view is that it has to be a capital asset for the partnership firm. We'll cover this 48.3 later. At that time, we will discuss this. Possible view, again to summarize, is that asset should be a capital asset for the partnership firm. Again, the charging event is a reconstitution for section 45.4. Now, whether following scenarios can be considered as a reconstitution. What if there is no admission, retirement, change in PSR, but one partner introduces a capital asset and the other partner withdraws that capital asset? Interestingly, the definition of reconstitution is restrictive definition, and this scenario is not covered under the reconstitution. What if there is no change in share, but there is a change in powers of the partners? So what if I enter into a partnership deed or deed of addenda whereby I redefine the powers of the partner? Again, not covered under the ambit of the reconstitution. Interestingly, we have seen scenarios where a profit share ratio and the loss sharing ratio can be different. So what if there is a change in loss sharing ratio, whether it can be considered as a reconstitution? Interesting to note that the change which is defined under reconstitution is change in share. It does not specify whether share in profit, share in loss, or share in the fixed capital. So even change in loss sharing ratio may get covered under this scope. In various partnership deed, you would have seen that a profit sharing ratio of the partner shall be in proportion to their fixed capital. So what if instead of changing the PSR, I change the fixed capital portion, fixed capital ratio? Whether one can say it is a reconstitution, a safer view is that yes, even this will get covered because the section says change in share. So even change in fixed capital ratio giving change to profit share will also be getting covered under reconstitution. Now, moving to computation mechanism of section 45.4, it says A is equal to B plus C minus D. what will happen if D, which is a capital balance, is a negative figure? So there is no guidance in terms of section 45.4, but there is this interesting decision of Summit Securities, which was in connection with the slump sale. The facts of the case were like this. Whenever there is a slump sale, how do you compute capital gains? Then you take a full value of consideration received for transfer of undertaking. That becomes my sale price or full value of consideration. What is my cost of acquisition for section 50B? Then it says that whatever is the net worth of this undertaking will be allowed as a cost of acquisition. So the computation mechanism is full value of consideration less net worth. That gives the answer of a capital gain. In the Summit Securities case, what was happening that yes, there was a consideration, full value of consideration, but the net worth of the entity was negative, meaning thereby the assets of the firm were assets of the entity was lesser than the liabilities, and hence the net worth amount was negative. So there were two options available. Either I can ignore the negative net worth, or I still consider the negative net worth. And because of the mathematical formula, I will end up adding the net worth to my computation. So instead of reducing net worth, I will add the debit balance of the net worth. Mumbai tribunal in this case took a view that if there is a negative figure of net worth, then same cannot be ignored for working out capital gains, and we have to add the negative figure into that. So though there is no clarification or guidance available under 45.4, we can take a rationale from Summit Securities and say that if my capital balance is a negative figure, then I cannot ignore that. I cannot consider it as a zero. What I have to do, I have to actually add that debit balance while computing the section 45.4 income. This is very interesting case that entire section 45.4 or section 9B, which will deal later, everywhere we are talking about a receipt, where receipt is not defined anywhere in the act. Now, interestingly, what if there is a reconstitution? Say I'm a partner of a partnership firm and I reduce my share of profit. Instead of paying me the money or capital asset, what partnership firm does is that they credit goodwill, the net goodwill, to my current capital account. So in that current capital account, it is not like a fixed capital which I cannot withdraw, but something which is withdrawable, something on which I can get interest also if partnership deed provides so. So this current capital is something which is withdrawable, again subject to formalities, because it is lying in the partnership firm's capital bank account. I can even get interest on that current capital account. So with all these features attached, can I say amount credited to capital account on a reconstitution can be considered as a constructive receipt, though I am not receiving any actual money in my bank account? Again, no clarity under section 45.4, but what guidance we can take is from Supreme Court decision in case of Keshav Mills, where the apex court held that what do you mean by receipt? Receipt of income refers to the first occasion where recipient gets money under his own control. So what is very important for receipt, that money should come under my control. So then again, going back to our example, that my money is lying in my current capital account, then I have to equate that whether it is similar to money lying in my pocket or money lying in my bank account, which I can withdraw at any time. The answer is no. So even if money is there in my current capital, it is not fully under my own control. So this indicates that receipt has to be actual receipt and it cannot be a constructive receipt if we apply the principles of Keshav-Mills. Is there any other guidance available? So there can be a small indication from the computation mechanism which we can take hint from. If we consider for a moment that whatever is credited to my current capital account is a receipt, then the next step which will I have to do is to compute capital gains. So similar example, if on a reduction of profit share of Mr. A, say goodwill of ₹100 is credited to his current capital account. So we will say the B figure, assuming that constructive receipt is a receipt, then the figure B will be ₹100 because that is the net credit of goodwill to his current capital account. Assuming there is no transfer of any capital, no receipt of capital asset, so there is only this B. What I have to deduct as per the formula is the capital balance excluding any goodwill. So what if my capital was say 200 before this reconstitution happened? So again to summarize, there is a net credit of goodwill of ₹100 on the reconstitution, and capital balance before such reconstitution was ₹200. As per the formula, the answer will be negative, so has to be restricted to 0, and there cannot be any tax. So if we consider the constructive receipt theory, there will not be any tax if we consider that. But what if we consider the actual receipt theory? So if Mr. A receives ₹300 from the partnership firm, then the formula can be applied very logically that figure under the B will be ₹300, figure under D will be ₹200. So ₹100 will be taxable, which is more logical that whatever I am receiving over and above my capital balance should be taxed as per the intention of section 45(4). So if we take a actual receipt theory, what is getting taxed is 300 minus 200 capital balance ₹100, which is nothing but receipt over and above my capital balance. So to summarize, considering the Supreme Court judgment and the logical implementation of computation formula, the possible answer is that constructive receipt cannot be considered. What is to be considered is the actual receipt by the partner. Just a minute. So this was about 45(4) issues with respect to 45(4). Now we will move to the next section, which is 9B. Again, a new section which is introduced by the Finance Act 2021. As we mentioned earlier, that 9B is somewhat similar to original 45(4), where the transfer of a capital asset by a partnership firm was getting taxed. Let's look at the section 9B in detail. Again, what is the chargeable event? When a partner receives during the previous year any capital asset or stock in trade or both from a firm. Sorry, what is to be received is capital asset, stock in trade or both. Interesting to note that section 45(4) covered only capital asset and money, but the 9B covers capital asset as well as stock in trade. It does not cover money. So this has to be received by a partner on what? It has to be received in connection with dissolution or reconstitution of the firm. Again, interesting to note that 9B covers not only reconstitution but also dissolution. 45(4) covers only reconstitution. So 45(4) is not applicable if there is a distribution on dissolution of the partnership firm. Only 9B will apply. what if everything is satisfied, that there is a receipt by a partner of a capital asset or stock in trade in connection with dissolution and reconstitution? Then the partnership firm shall be deemed to have transferred such capital asset, stock in trade, or both to the partner in the year of such receipt by the partner. Since last 1 hour we were struggling to find what is the whether there is any transfer or not, whether there is any capital asset or not. Finally, under 9b, we can say that yes, finally we have got the transfer present, which says that if partner receives stock in trade or capital asset or both in connection with dissolution reconstitution, there is a deemed transfer. Interestingly, the this deeming fiction is inserted in section 9b and not under section 2 subsection 47, which defines the transfer. So now we have got the transfer deeming transfer present. From such deemed transfer, whatever is the income, it shall be deemed to be income of the partnership firm, and it shall be chargeable to tax under which head? So there are two options. It can be either, it can be profits and gains from business or profession. So if there is a transfer of a stock in trade, the logical head will be the income from business profession. If it is a capital asset, then it will fall under the capital gain provision. How to compute this income? So it says that it has to be computed in accordance with the provisions of this act. So whatever is the normal computation mechanism for business income from section 28 to 44 onwards to 44, or whatever provisions which are applicable to capital gains, say section 48, that will apply. There is no separate computation mechanism. The way you compute your normal business income or capital gain, you compute that way only, unless otherwise provided. The unless otherwise provided part is for the subsequent line, which says that fair market value of such capital asset stock in trade shall be deemed to be full value of consideration. So when I will go to section 48 to compute the capital gains under 9b, what is the full value of consideration? Then it is the fair market value. So that is the deeming consideration for this section. Interestingly, fair market value is not defined under 9b. So what we can resort to, we can go to section 2 subsection 24b, which defines fair market value of a capital asset, which says that what do you mean by fair market value? Then it means open market sale price. So that has to be considered as a fair market value. Interestingly, there is no definition of FMV for a stock in trade. We do have FMV definition in other sections also. For example, under section 56 to 10 to 10, 56 to 7b, we have rule 11UA, which talks about computation of fair market value. But those prescribed computation is for section 56 only. When it comes to 45(4) or section 9b, what we have to consider is the open market sale price. You have to consider the actual fair value of the asset. Interestingly, the section 9b provides that if there is any difficulty, which actually there are many difficulties. If there is any difficulty while giving effect to section 9b or section 45(4), then CBDT has been given the power to issue guidelines, and whenever such guidelines are issued, it has to be placed before both the houses, and it shall be binding on assessee as well as department. So interestingly, the guidelines issued by CBDT as per the section 9b will be binding on the tax authorities also and on the assessee also. And I think since the section is applicable, so all these section 45(4) and 9b are applicable with effect from 1/4/2020. So any transaction or reconstitution which has taken place or receipt which has taken place from 1/4/2020, this taxing provision will apply. And as we have seen in the earlier slides, there are so many issues. So I think this is the high time for the CBDT to issue guidelines for removing these difficulties. Pending these issues, how to pay tax under the current provision is a big question mark, because the computation of the capital gain itself is under the is facing various ambiguities. Okay, so we'll jump to some illustrations for section 9B as well as section 45(4). So in brief, for the subsequent illustration, there is this same set of facts which we will consider. So there is this partnership firm ABC. It has got three type of assets. One is a capital asset, one is stock in trade, and third is cash bank balance. We have I have given the what are the book value and what are the fair market value. There are these three partners A, B, and C of this firm. Everyone holds equal share, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So the book value of all the assets is 300, whereas the fair market value is 600. Appreciation in the value in terms of fair market value is there in capital asset, where the book value is 25, but the fair value is 200. Stock in trade book value is 75, but fair market value is again 200. For the purpose of this illustration, what we have assumed that book value is equal to cost or the index cost of acquisition, as the case may be. Again, there is one assumption that whenever there is any distribution on dissolution of the firm or any of the partner retires, the distribution will be like this. Mr. A will always get the capital asset worth rupees 200. Mr. B will get stock in trade worth rupees 200, and Mr. C will get the cash bank balance of 200. So there is a equal distribution if there is a dissolution or there is a retirement. We will cover four scenarios in this. What if there is a dissolution of the firm? What if there is a retirement of either Mr. A, Mr. B, or Mr. C? What will be the tax implication under section 9B as well as section 45(4)? So first we'll take a simple example of plain vanilla dissolution. Okay, whenever there is a dissolution, I'll first check whether section 9B is applicable in this case. So 9B is applicable if there is a reconstitution on dissolution. Yes, tick mark. Whether there is any receipt of stock in trade, capital asset, or both, yes, that is there. So section 9B applies. The computation mechanism is that what I have to consider fair market value of the capital asset or stock in trade. In the current case, what will be chargeable under 9B will be under two heads. One, stock in trade, taxable under business income. Capital asset, taxable under the capital gains provision. So as we can see, there is this. There is first transfer of a distribution of this stock in trade. So obviously section 9B applies and it will be taxable under income from just a minute. Yeah, sorry. So there is this distribution of stock in trade. So first I will compute income from business profession. Business profession, I will first consider rupees 200, which is the fair market value. I will reduce from it cost, which is rupees 75. So rupees 125 will be chargeable to tax under business profession income. Then we also have a transfer of we also have a receipt of a capital asset. So again, under capital gains head, fair market value of capital asset is rupees 200. Cost of acquisition is 25 to rupees 175 will be taxable under capital gains head. So this is taxation under section 9B. Once 9B is covered, we'll jump to section 45(4). The answer is there cannot be any tax under 45(4) because 45(4) does not apply in case of a dissolution. So only we have 9B, income under head, business profession and the capital gain. The total taxable income is rupees 300 on dissolution of the firm. Now tweaking the scenario, what if there is no dissolution? What if only Mr. B retires from the partnership firm and he receives stock in trade from the firm? So again, 9B applicability, whether there is dissolution or reconstitution, answer is yes, there is this retirement of Mr. B. Whether there is a receipt of capital asset or stock in trade, yes, there is a receipt of stock in trade. If that is the scenario, income arising from such transfer will be taxable as an income from business profession. So what Mr. B is receiving is stock in trade having fair market value of rupees 200. So that will be the consideration. The cost, which is rupees 75, will be deducted and we will get the taxable business income of rupees 125. Under 9B, there is no capital gains because there is no transfer of a capital asset. Now coming to section 45(4), is there any taxability? The answer is no, because there is no transfer of a capital asset or money. There is no receipt of a capital asset or money. It is only stock in trade. So again, 45(4) does not apply. We have only 9B and that too only business income. So the answer is rupees 125. What if A and B are still there? Mr. C retires and what he receives is money worth rupees 200. There is no distribution or receipt of a capital asset and stock in trade. How this computation mechanism will work? We'll first go to 9B charging section. Whether there is any reconstitution or dissolution, yes, there is this retirement. Whether there is any receipt of a capital asset, stock in trade or both, the answer is no. So the section 9B will not apply in a scenario where there is a dissolution or a reconstitution, but what a partner gets is a pure money or pure cash. He does not get any capital asset or stock in trade. Then 9B does not apply. Now we'll jump to section 45(4). Again to check charging applicability, whether there is a reconstitution, yes. Whether there is any receipt of money or capital asset or both, answer is yes. Then we have to compute income under section 45(4). First, what is the value of money received? Rupees 200, which is the cash balance, which cash and bank balance, which Mr. C would have got. Yeah. What is the fair market value of capital asset received by Mr. C? There is no receipt of capital asset, so C is 0. Whatever is the balance in capital account of Mr. C, which we have seen is rupees 100 each. So everyone has a capital balance of rupees 100. So B is rupees 200, C is 0, D is 100. So resultant capital gain under section 45(4) is rupees 100. Again to summarize, no tax under 9B, only tax under section 45(4). Now this is the interesting and most complicated scenario because earlier we have seen that either 9B was applicable fully, that business profit as well as capital gain was chargeable under 9B, or only one of the section, one of the head with 9B, or section 45.4. We have not seen any illustration earlier where 9b was also applicable and 45.4 was applicable. So now considering the next scenario where Mr. A retires from the partnership firm, and on retirement he receives a capital asset. Without going into the computation mechanism, we'll just check the taxability provision. First, we'll check 9b. Again, same steps, whether there is a reconstitution or dissolution, yes. Whether there is a receipt of a capital asset or stock in trade, yes, there is a receipt of capital asset. Where so 9b, yes, it is applicable in this illustration. Now, whether section 45.4 is applicable, similar scenario, yes, there is this reconstitution. Whether there is a receipt of any money or capital asset, answer is yes, there is a receipt of capital asset. So even section 45.4 is applicable to this example. Now we have come to a scenario where for a same thing, there is this section 9b applicable as well as section 45.4 applicable. So can we say that there is double taxation, or our interpretation is wrong that either I have to apply section 9b or section 45.4, or either of these but not both, whether that is possible to avoid the double taxation, or there is any other relief in such scenarios? To answer the first question, that whether both these sections will apply simultaneously, the answer is there in the section, sorry, there is this typo error. This is explanation 2 to section 45.4. I have wrongly written 45.5. This is 45.4. So this explanation 2 says that for removal of doubt, it is clarified that when a capital asset is received by a partner, basically the specified person from the firm, and it is in connection with reconstitution, then section 45.4 shall operate in addition to section 9b, and taxation under the said provisions shall be worked out independently. So this explanation clearly indicates that if there is a reconstitution, then yes, 9b and 45.4 applies. On this reconstitution, if there is a capital asset received, then both will apply. If that is the scenario, you have to apply both. It is not either or, you have to apply both, and you have to compute the capital gains independently. The way we have seen that 45.4 has a specific mechanism, you have to compute capital gain as per that. For 9b, you have a normal computation mechanism of 48, you have to compute as per that, and both have to be worked independently and in addition to each other. So this is very important explanation. So now the question is, if this is the scenario, then whether this is it correct to say that there is the double taxation? Answer is yes, there is a double taxation for a same receipt. Now the next question is that, is there any relief to eliminate such double taxation? So answer is possibly yes, there is certain relaxation or relief available to eliminate this double taxation. What is the mode or provision for that? So the answer is the amended section 48 subclause 3. So normal 48 section says that income chargeable under the head capital gain, you have to compute by deducting from full value of consideration following things. First is cost of acquisition, second is cost of transfer. Now we have a new category added to it. So whenever I am computing any capital gains, specified capital gains, from the sale price, I have to deduct cost of acquisition, cost of transfer, and this new category of 48.3, which is in case of value of any money or capital asset received by a partner from the firm, which is referred under section 45.4. the amount chargeable to income tax as income of such firm under section 45(4), which is attributable to a capital asset being transferred by the specified entity, meaning firm, calculated in a prescribed manner. Very complex provision, but if we break this provision, what has to be considered, that if there is an income under section 45(4), so for example, in earlier example we have seen that there was this income computed under section 45(4), so that income will be allowed as a deduction. So in this example we have computed income as ₹100. Okay, so this income will be allowed as a deduction to whom? This will on what? This will be allowed as a deduction on capital asset being transferred by the specified entity. So whenever there is a income chargeable to tax under section 45(4), then I get a deduction, then the partnership firm gets deduction on a transfer of the capital asset, provided, very interesting, that this income has to be attributable to a capital asset being transferred. So we'll again revisit to this meaning, what is attributable to a capital asset. First, we'll check what was the intention behind this amendment of 48(3). So extract of memorandum says that a consequential amendment is also proposed under section 48 to mitigate double taxation which may have happened, but for this provision in a situation where the asset which was revalued and for which income under section 45(4)(a). So this 4A was with respect to finance bill. Now the actual provision is section 45(4), was brought to tax, is transferred subsequently by the specified entity. So the intention talks about a scenario where there is a reconstitution. Okay, there is no transfer of a capital asset, but what partnership firm does, ABCR partner, they does the revaluation of the assets and say revaluation of a capital asset, say land. Land was the capital asset. They do the revaluation of that, and out of that revaluation they makes a payment to the retiring partner. Whenever this scenario arises, as we have seen earlier, 45(4) will trigger and partnership firm will pay the tax. Again, when this land, being a capital asset which is still lying in the partnership firm, is sold by firm to some third party, at that time there will again be a tax. So this memorandum says that in such a scenario you will get a deduction as per this 48(3) to avoid double taxation when ultimately you are going to sell the capital asset being land. So one possible interpretation of attributable to a capital asset can be like this, that today I do the revaluation, I pay the money to the retiring partner, and subsequently the revalued asset is sold in the market. At that time, whatever income I had offered, partnership firm had offered, that will be given as a deduction to the firm. So interesting to note that whether this 48 enhanced cost deduction will be available for section 45(4), then the answer is no. This 48(3) deduction will not apply to 45(4). Why? So because the deduction comes from 48, which is a computation mechanism, and 45(4) does not follow 48. It has its own computation mechanism. Again, one possible interpretational issue was that whether this 48(3) benefit is available to a partner also, who gets the capital asset and then subsequently he sells that asset. Answer is no. This 48(3) is available only to the partnership firm. And why so? Because if we read the wordings of the section, which is income under section 45(4), which is attributable to the capital asset being transferred by the SE, basically specified entity, that is partnership firm, then this deduction will be available. So very clear, partners does not get deduction under this section. It is only the partnership firm. Now, to which scenarios 48 will apply, as we discussed that does it apply to computation of capital gains on subsequent transfer of a capital asset by a firm? This example we already discussed, that in case of retirement of Mr. A, instead of distributing him capital asset, what firm does is that firm revalues all the assets, basically capital asset and stock in trade. So in our actual facts of the case, what firm does is that Mr. A wants to retire. Instead of giving him a capital asset, firm does the revaluation at fair market value. So the asset side of the partnership firm will now be standing at 600 instead of 300. Share of Mr. A will be 1/3, so basically rupees 200, and firm pays rupees 200 to Mr. A. So this is the facts of the case. So applying this scenario, cash paid by the firm will be taxable under section 45(4). 200 minus 100, rupees 100 will be taxable under section 45(4). Whether any tax under section 9B, as there is no capital asset or stock in trade received, so no tax under 9B. In future, when ABC firm will sell the capital asset, basically we are talking about the capital asset which has a fair market value of rupees 200 and a book value of 25. Whenever in future firm will sell this capital asset, at that time partnership firm will get a deduction of rupees 100, which is nothing but the income today on which firm is paying tax, income as per section 45(4). That will be allowed as a deduction under 48(3), either rupees 100 or the other amount calculated in a prescribed manner. Why this bracket is important? Because this section 48(3) says that the deduction has to be computed in a prescribed manner. So we can't say that 100 will be the deduction. It can be proportionate amount over proportionate amount considering capital asset as well as stock in trade, or any other method which the CBDT will have to prescribe. So we have seen, yes, in this scenario we can see that 48(3) applies, and future double taxation, so this we are talking about future double taxation is avoided, is eliminated by virtue of this 48(3). Okay. So applicability of section 48. So we have considered a scenario where capital asset was not moving, there was just a revaluation. What if there is actual movement of a capital asset? So can we say that this 48(3) applies to computation of capital gains under section 9B? So example, our current case where on retirement, Mr. A, instead of receiving cash, he gets a capital asset on retirement. So can we say that 48(3) will apply in this scenario? Because as we have seen earlier, when Mr. A receives a capital asset on reconstitution, 9B also applies and 45(4) also applies. So can we say 48(3) benefit is available now? As per the memorandum, it looks like whatever tax you are paying today, we will give you deduction in future to avoid double taxation. So can we say that benefit of 48(3) can be taken simultaneously when there is 45(4) also and 9B also? Again, not a clear answer, but if we take a consider the fairness, then yes, there is a double taxation, and hence 48.3 benefit should be given in a current scenario where 45.4 is also today and 9B is also arising today. So if we consider this, then the computation mechanism for the double taxation will be like this. Income under section 9B, when Mr. A receives a capital asset on retirement, will be fair market value, which is 200, minus cost or index cost, which is 25. And there is this deduction under 48.3, which will cover later, and the balance will be 9B income. Section 45.4, as we have seen, it has a separate computation mechanism, so it is free from ambiguity of 48.3. So we'll work out that first actually. What is the value of money received? 0. What is the fair market value of capital asset being received by the partner is rupees 200. And what is the balance in capital account of Mr. C? 100. So as per the 45.4 formula, the chargeable income will be rupees 100. Okay. And we can take one possible view is that this 100 is arising because of a capital asset, which is getting taxed under 9B. And hence, while computing capital gains under 9B, which is 200 minus 25, I will deduct income under section 45.4 of rupees 100, and the resultant figure I will offer for the tax and income under 9B. So the total income will be 75 plus 100, 175. Again, this is based on the possible interpretation of 48.3, and it should be possible considering the fairness of the provision. Dealing with some other issues, we have seen that in case of 45.4, when we saw the computation mechanism A is equal to B plus C minus D, we said that A can never be a negative. If the answer is coming negative, we have to restrict it to a 0. But there is no such mention under section 9B. So it says that chargeable as an income under the head, income from business, profession, or capital gains, without restricting anything. So can we say that in 9B there is a possibility of claiming loss? Answer is yes, because chargeable to income under the head as per the computation mechanism. So computation mechanism of section 28 to 44 or 48 can give a negative result if cost is more. So yes, there is a possibility of having loss under section 9B. Again, 45.4, you can never have a loss scenario. Again, interesting to note that over the course of this discussion, we have talked about when a capital asset or stock in trade is received by the partner and the tax implication on the firm. What will happen when the said capital asset is sold by the partner in future? So for example, if a partnership firm distributes gives the capital asset to a partner of a fair market value of say rupees 1,000, and it pays tax under say 9B and 45.4. What will happen when this asset worth rupees 1,000 is sold in future at say rupees 2,000 by the partner? Will he get the 1,000 rupees as a cost on which the partnership firm has paid the tax? Again, not a clear answer, no clear answer under the amended provision, but a possible view can be yes, you can consider the FMV on which firm has paid the tax as a cost because it is justified, and the partnership firm has already paid tax, which is nothing but the partner paying the tax through the partnership firm. Again, if we consider the various decisions, not exactly similar to this, but by Shirin by K. Koka, in that case also, Supreme Court has taken a view that fair market value on a commercial basis can be considered as a cost of acquisition. So this looks like very justified case to claim the enhanced cost. Reason being, the firm has paid tax on it. Okay, now very important and very important from the transaction advisory or the restructuring point of view question, which is arising because of this amendment. We have seen in the past partnership firms, LLPs are converting themselves into private limited or a public limited company under chapter 21 of Companies Act, which is similar to part 11 of erstwhile 1956 Act. Now, what happens on conversion? So there is this partnership firm and partners having the capital balances. This firm gets converted into company, all assets, liabilities, etc. of the firm gets statutorily vested with the company, and partners, against their interest in the firm, they get the shares of the company. So now interesting issue is that when a partner receives shares on a conversion of firm into company, can anyone say that 9B applies or section 45(4) applies? Because there is a receipt of something, there is a receipt of a capital asset being shares. So whether all these conversions which up till now were exempt under section 47, as well as based on the tax pin decision, can in a current scenario we can say that it is taxable. One more alarming thing is that 47 talks about exempt conversion, says that if you satisfy certain condition, then conversion will not be considered as a transfer. But as we have seen, 45(4) does not require transfer, it requires only a receipt. So even though there is exemption or the benefit under 47, it may not have any use. So are we going to face a scenario where conversion which were exempt till current date will get taxed under section 45(4) or 9B on receipt of shares by partners? The possible answer is no. It may still be able to continue the exemption. Why? Because for both 45(4) as well as 9B, we need reconstitution or dissolution. Now, whether conversion tantamounts to dissolution under Income Tax Act, so we have various decisions of Mumbai High Court, Madras High Court, and Bangalore ITAT of Taxpin, CAD Center, etc., which under the context of erstwhile 45(4) held that categoric principle that conversion of firm into company does not amount to dissolution of a partnership firm. So for 9B and for 9B, whether there is a dissolution, the answer is no. Now the next is whether there is a reconstitution on conversion. Again, the definition of reconstitution as per Finance Act 2021 means admission, retirement, or change in PSR. When a firm gets converted into company, there is neither admission nor retirement, nor there is any change in profit sharing ratio. So that gives a support that yes, it will still be exempt under the new taxation regime. Also, if you check at the taxation provision for 9B and 45(4) both, there has to be receipt, and this receipt has to be by the partners. When on conversion shares are received, these will be received by the shareholders and not the partners, because partnership firm ceases to exist. Second, even if we consider that it is received by the partners, the giver has to be a partnership firm, basically the specified entity. When we deal with the conversion scenario, who is issuing the shares? The shares are being issued by company and not a partnership firm, because a partnership firm can never issue shares. So On the second front also, whether the receipt by a partner is from the partnership firm, no, answer is no, it is from a company. The third possible argument is that, as we have seen, that it has to be a receipt of a capital asset, and we took a possible view that it has to be a capital asset for the giver, basically the partnership firm in our example. If we consider the current scenario, the conversion scenario, who is giving the asset? So what is the capital asset? What is the asset which is given? It is the shares of a private limited company. Whether the shares of a private limited company can be considered as a asset? No, it cannot be considered as an asset for the company. Max, we can say that it is confirmation of liability towards shareholder. So with all these possible arguments, we can take a view that if there is a conversion, it can be out of the ambit of the section 9b and 45(4). Very interesting, very interesting case which we were handling recently. I have not mentioned in the PPT. Is that what if there was a reconstitution, meaning thereby there are this Mr. ABC, they inter se make changes in their profit sharing ratio. Goodwill is credited to say Mr. A and debited to B and C. And on conversion, Mr. A, B, and C gets shares of a private limited company against their capital balance. Can anyone say that this can be taxable under section 9b or 45(4) on the ground that there was a earlier reconstitution and this receipt of shares is nothing but receipt in excess of my capital balance is excluding the goodwill? Again, very litigative case whether 45(4) or this applies, but if we consider who is the giver is not the partnership firm. What is being received is not a capital asset for the giver, basically a private limited company. And based on that, a possible view, though can be very litigative, that even such sort of conversion where there is a reconstitution followed by conversion, such cases may be outside the ambit of section 45(4) and 9b. So this was with respect to other issues. Now, if there are any questions, then we can deal with those.
Yeah, Amit. Participants can post questions on chat or maybe unmute if they want to, preferably chat.
So Chintan, how will take up the questions, whether anyone will read out or how?
I will read out if there are any questions posted to me,
Okay.
or if they post directly to you, then if possible you can also read out. That is not a problem.
Okay, so should I read or you are reading?
I think it is posted to you directly, sir.
Achha, okay, I'll read out. So I can see 1, 2, 5, 6 questions which has directly given to me. So one question is, if constructive receipt cannot be considered, then by logic can one argue that even debit balance in partners capital cannot be brought to tax under section 45(4)? So the answer is that when we are talking about when we were discussing about B plus C minus D, B is actually value of money received, whereas D is amount standing in the capital account of the partner, which can be credit balance or debit balance. It can be a negative figure also. So constructive receipt theory cannot be applied to D being negative, because it doesn't talk about any receipt. It talks about mere value of amount, mere value of balance in the capital account. So yes, constructive receipt may not be applicable for negative capital balance. Just to highlight one practical issue that we were, during the course of entire discussion, we were talking about a reconstitution followed by a receipt of capital asset stock in trade money. What if someone does the withdrawal part first? So receipt of capital asset is first, followed by the reconstitution. Whether 45(4) will apply? The possible answer is no. There has to be a reconstitution, and the receipt has to be in connection with reconstitution. But now the next question is, can I plan the transaction in such a way that withdrawal first and reconstitution afterwards? The possible or the safer view is no, that is not possible, because ultimately a commercial person with a commercial wisdom will ask that why other partners allowed such withdrawal. The answer is they allowed the withdrawal because of the reconstitution at the backdrop. So one can easily link that, and hence it will be very risky to plan out the transaction in that way, basically to have a debit balance, withdraw everything, make a debit balance, and then do the reconstitution. So very risky proposition if it is a planned transaction. Next is, in case of a non-resident partner, any issues which you foresee from DTAA perspective? So the answer to this is like this, that though 9B is purely income of a partnership firm, because it explicitly says that there is a deemed transfer. So 9B is purely income of the partnership firm and not the partner. When it comes to 45(4), from the reading of the provision, it looks like that it is income arising from a receipt. So who is receiving? It's the partner who is receiving. So basically it should be a capital gain of the partner. But the section says that whatever the case may be, it will be taxed as an income of the partnership firm. So even if the partner is a non-resident, since there is no tax implication under 45(4) or 9B to the partner per se, it is on the firm. So no international tax complication or DTAA implication will follow in if there is a non-resident partner. Just a minute. Can it be argued where section 9B and 45(4) both apply? Then in such case 9B becomes charging provision, and that computation should be made in accordance with 45(4). Consequently, no double taxation. The answer is no, because 45(4) provides for its own computation mechanism, and 9, again, there is no similar assets covered. 9B covers capital asset, stock in trade and stock in trade, and 45(4) covers capital asset and money. So there is no similar assets covered. Second, the events here are 9B dissolution as well as reconstitution, whereas 45(4) is only on reconstitution. And above all, the explanation 2 to the 45(4) makes it very clear that both these sections have to be applied independently and gains have to be computed independently. So can anyone say that either 9B or 45(4)? Then answer is no. 9B is also a charging provision which says that compute the capital gains or the business profit as per the normal provision, basically 48. 45(4) is also a charging provision which says that compute the capital gain as per the specific computation machinery. So yes, both will apply, and there is a possibility of double taxation which can be eliminated by virtue of 48(3). What if reconstitution is carried out before the conversion and shares are issued in that revised proportion? I think we have discussed this in the last illustration, basically. Possible answer which can be litigated by the department to the very great extent is that we can say that it is not a taxable under 45(4) on a grounds that the giver is not a giver is not the partnership firm, it is the private limited company. What is being received is not a capital asset for the giver. And third, what is being received is received by the partner, is received by the shareholders and not the partners. Having said that, plain Manila conversion will be still a very clean approach, but conversion coupled with reconstitution before will be subject to heavy litigation. And if uh, someone wants to eliminate the tax risk, the better view can be uh, withdraw the capital balances, including the net goodwill, etc., pay the tax and then go for the conversion. That can be a possible view if you want to avoid the litigation risk. But if you are okay to take a litigation risk, then these are the grounds on which you can fight against the taxability. The next question is, the capital asset or stock in trade, immovable property, transferred to the partner, whether that will be STCG or LTCG, when partners sells, how to identify. So if this transfer is on account of, we assume that this is on account of reconstitution, then as we discussed for the partnership firm per se, there is a lack of clarity whether this is short term or long term, because both the definition of short term capital gains says that gains arising on a transfer of a short term or long term capital asset. But as we have seen that for 45(4), it is, there is no transfer, but there is a tax gains on receipt. So long term, short term classification not possible under 45(4). But 9B, yes, for 9B you can identify whether it is short term, long term, because there is a deemed transfer under 9B of a capital asset or stock in trade. So this was with respect to firm. What about the partner who gets that capital asset or stock in trade and sells that in future? So I think the normal holding period section will apply, which says that the day on which the partner receives the property, basically the capital asset or stock in trade, from that day we have to calculate the period of holding. Again, no provision for adding the period of holding of previous owner under this scenario. So it will be from the date of receipt, we have to consider the period of holding for partner. So these are the questions. Just a minute, whether there are any other questions.
Couple of questions
Yeah.
have been posted to me.
Achha, yeah.
One by Mr. Manish.
Uh-huh.
In 45(4), tax rate will be 31.2%, right, and not 20.8%.
So the conservative answer to this is yes. It will be the normal tax rate applicable to partnership firm of a 30% added by the applicable surcharge and cess. The reason for this conservative answer is that for applying 20% rate of 112, I should have a gains from a transfer of a capital asset. And the way we have seen in our presentation, there is no transfer, and again there is ambiguity of what is the capital asset which is getting transferred. So yes, it will be 30% for section 45(4). For 9B, as we discussed, for 9B you have clear-cut provisions similar to 48. So there you can have 20 or 30% based on the holding period of the capital asset.
Okay.
So is it not wise to first transfer sell the capital asset to avoid the higher rate of taxation? What is your views?
I think that is very logical view, is that you sell the capital asset first. So for example, in our case, the capital asset of having fair market value of 200, so pay long-term capital gains at the rate 20%, and from that distribute to a partner share of profit. So that can be a possible view, but only thing is that whenever you will sell the capital asset, in our case, there was this capital asset, stock in trade and cash bank balance. If we sell the capital asset, there will be gains on which all the partners will be having the right. So this 200 profit on actual sale will be credited 1/3 to each A, B, and C. If you want to give specifically to Mr. A 200 rupees, then along with this sale, you have to give something additional also. So the moment you give something additional, you will have a 45(4) implications. So on sale, yes, there is a possible reduction, but not the complete reduction of the tax.
Vishal Bhai had raised hand. I think he wants to ask
Yeah,
a question.
Amit, I'm audible.
Yeah, sure.
Amit, you raised a question. You raised an issue where there is a possibility of double taxation. That is 9B and 45(4). And what you pointed out that as a possible means to avoid the double taxation, there was 48(3) introduced, right?
Correct.
Now, I think what has happened. See, double taxation might be coming by way of 9B and 45(4). So that double taxation is coming when there is a transfer or the reconstitution. Now, do you think that double taxation on that transaction is avoided by 48(3) because 48(3) is talking something different? It is maybe it is talking about giving the benefit of that tax paid or the gains offered to the firm when the firms sell later on.
Okay. So what Vishal you are saying is correct. From the intention also, or the way section 48(3) is drafted, it looks like if I do a revaluation today, okay, and sell the capital asset in future. So when I do a revaluation and distribute, say, cash bank balance, then 45(4) I will pay tax. And that capital asset I am transferring in future, so at that time I should get a deduction. So that is something which is coming out of the memorandum also and the drafting also. But from where we can draw the analogy that even if there is a transfer of capital asset, in which case 45(4) is also applicable, 9B is also applicable, we can have 48(3) benefit on the two grounds. One ground of fairness, that we have to give the benefit on the both fronts, and one is on just a minute, is my PPT visible?
Yes.
Yeah. And the other possible argument for this is the wordings of it, which says that in case value of any money or capital asset. So it does not talk about only in a scenario where money is paid by doing revaluation without transferring the capital asset, but it also covers a scenario where capital asset is received by a partner and there is a 45(4) taxation. So because of this word, any money or capital asset, there is a slight hope that it may apply in both the scenario. Transfer of capital asset today, 45(4) and 9B applies today in this scenario also, or revaluation and transfer subsequently. So that is again subject to litigation, and both things are going very contrary. 48(3) drafting is contrary, memorandum is completely different.
Yeah. So that's not coming clearly out of 48.
Yeah, very true.
Okay, thank you, Amit. Amit, can I ask you a question? Amit?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
We discuss about the rate differences, 30% and 20%, and definitely a caution has to be there about the carry forward of the losses and offsetting that losses against this 45 and the 9 which you have discussed. But say for example, in a scenario where there are huge losses carried forward by the firm, is it not advisable in those cases that first you sell the assets to the partner and get them offset, and to avoid such a rate of taxes heavily?
So very rightly pointed out by you, if there are losses scenario and facts of the case says that there is a capital loss or the business loss, and on the asset side you have a stock in trade or a capital asset, then yes, the logical or the right approach is to sell the asset first, set off the losses so that there is no taxable gains, capital gain or a business income in the partnership firm. Since it is already chargeable to tax, there is no subsequent tax on the withdrawal by the partner. So yes, in this kind of scenario, logical, sale first, set off the losses, whatever balance share of profit remains, distribute to partner, exempt under 10(2)(a). Yeah.
We'll wait for a minute or so, and if there is no question, then we move towards conclusion. Then.
Again, to just in connection to the last query, what we had dealt that if I have income under section 45(4), then set off of losses has all the issues, intra-head, inter-head, set off and carry forward. But that does not apply to 9B. If whatever income is there under 9B, capital gain or business profit, there you can have the normal set of intra-head, inter-head set off. So 9B, against 9B income, you can have the set of benefit, and you can also have a losses in 9B itself, which is not possible under 45(4).
Okay. I think we should move towards conclusion. Any question posted to you directly, Amit?
Just a minute, I'll check. No.
Great. Perfect. So we move towards conclusion, Amit. I think it goes without saying that Amit bhai, you have covered all issues of taxation under partnership under Finance Act 2021. The constant process of unlearning and relearning in life has continued here also, where erstwhile 45(4) has now been completely replaced, and due to such replacement, Amit bhai has listed all the possible issues, all possible solutions, and all possible scenarios in a very organized manner, and explained it in a very simple and lucid language. I'm sure the knowledge gained here in this session is a long-term capital gain for all of us. So with this, I, on behalf of the participants and the other CP Study Circle, thank Amit bhai for this session and request all the participants to switch on their video, unmute themselves, and give him a huge round of applause. Thank you, Amit bhai.
Thank you.
Great, Amit.
Good one. Great.
Thank you.
Amit, one more thing, just can you just share the presentation so that it can be shared with the
yes, I'll email the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you everyone.
We end the meeting here.